Well, one is I worry about the things I can't control because who knows what will happen. Recession. Will we plunge into a recession? Will the Fed keep interest rates too high, which means that there's less money available, which ultimately, as the saying goes, the Fed takes the punch bowl away whenever the party gets going. So, they've done that. So, how aggressive will they be, and does that plunge us into a recession or not? Another thing I worry about. Look, I mean the war in Ukraine and what Russia does. There are all these unknowns out there in the world. But the things that I focus most on are what are the things that I can control. I worry about things, for example, for our own portfolio companies, which is, hey, if you're in a freight recession and you're in the freight business, you got to figure out how to take cost out. So are we taking out enough cost on the one hand? On the other hand, you want to make sure you're cutting fat, not muscle, because when those freight markets return, you'd hate to be in a position where you can't capitalize on those. And if you don't have the right people in the right places, then you can't take advantage of the growth. So I worry, do we get that balance right, in terms of cutting versus being ready to grow and the fat versus muscle. I worry on the technology side, our innovative companies, they're great, but they're not the only ones that see it. So, anytime you do something that's successful, people watch it, they'll copy you.
Yeah.
And so, who are the copycats out there? Who are the brilliant innovators out there that are going to come after the companies that we've invested in that might be doing great now, but won't be great tomorrow if they don't keep staying in front of the market. So those are the things I worry about.
Got it. I'm curious about this. Obviously, you do a ton of deals. When some of these larger companies start consolidating and buying, other mid-sized companies, and they, take up more market share, right? Is that good for the industry, or is that bad? How do you see that?
Well, it all depends on a couple things. Somebody that's consolidating, that's bringing high quality service or otherwise improving the experience, that's great for the industry. I mean, good example of that would be, here's a controversial one. In the world of freight forwarding, there are a lot of freight forwarders that have been complaining about how expensive their software is. So WiseTech, which is really the market leader in freight forwarding software, has taken a lot of flack in the few months because they're increasing rates. Okay. I had the chance to interview their CEO, Richard White. He's built an $18 billion company in freight forwarding software. Okay. Interviewed him at our conference 2 weeks ago. And one thing that stood out to me was, so this guy's bought over 60 companies in freight forwarding software. But guess what? He has done such a great job of automating the process and stripping out inefficiency and using software to make these freight forwarders more productive that consolidation has been great for the customers that have benefited from that. Guess what? The prices have gone up, but the costs have come down by a greater extent. He's just made things more automated, more efficient. So, look, I think if you do consolidation right, everybody wins. Now, that's not always the case, because on the other hand, if in the airline industry, for example, the JetBlue acquisition of Spirit, it was proposed, hasn't yet been approved. One reason why is the FAA is saying, hey, if these guys do it, are they going to jack up rates because you only have one choice on a lane, and in which case the consumer loses. So listen, if the only reason for consolidation is to increase prices without improving the customer experience, then that's bad for the market. So I think it all comes down to whether you're in the first camp or the second camp, whether you're taking out cost and making the customer's life better or not.
Got it. There's tons of startups in the technology space. I mean, we're here at Manifest now. We see a bunch of them, right? But it seems as though a lot of them are solving the same problems, right? As I kind of go around, I'm kind of seeing a lot of redundancy. Right. What is your advice to some of these startups and people who are looking to start companies in the tech space? Like, how can they stand out? How can they differentiate themselves from everybody else?
I think there are a lot of people that say think big, but sometimes it's better to think small. Think about the one thing that you could do better than anybody else and then really nail it. I mean, as an example, when I talked with Richard White at WiseTech, again, this guy built one of the largest companies in our entire industry. How did he do it? Well, he started by doing something that sounds unbelievably tedious but super important. He just mapped out the workflows of the freight forwarders that he worked with in Australia back in the early 90s and, painstakingly mapped out exactly what happened when, the flow charting, and then figured out how can I use software to automate this one little step, And so one little step at a time. The credo that Richard wrote for his company, and it's really for software engineers very inspirational, is we will change the world one line of code at a time. Okay.
Right.
So he's doing one thing really precisely, but because he did that one thing really well, he ended up building the most valuable company in his arena. So I think big can be motivational, but sometimes better to think small, do one thing really well.
I love that. I definitely agree with that. I think of like Calendly, for example, right? Very small problem that's being solved, but $1 billion company, right? Just
Yes.
off of scheduling.
Exactly.
Right? Simple problem.
Exactly.